The president reacts to newly published documents that falsely accuse former Trump associate Carter Page of being a Russian agent. Meanwhile, the Democrats accuse President Trump of being a Russian agent. Yes, the world has gone mad, but it's okay. We're here to make sense of it for you. Evening, everyone, and welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. With us, live in Los Angeles, Richard Fowler and Lisa Booth. A big story for you tonight on the Democrats and immigration, and a swamp watch on how the loyal workforce at Toys R Us has been treated by elitist fat cats that you won't want to miss. But first, last week, we talked about the establishment reaction to President Trump's European trip and pointed out all the IYIs pompously pontificating about it. Remember that? Black Swan author Nassim Taleb's brilliant phrase to describe elitist groupthink: intellectual yet idiot. IYI. I said there'd be a lot more after Helsinki, and I wasn't wrong. This is part 2. But like others, even on this network, I was upset by the Russia summit. This is personal for me. My parents are Hungarian. They escaped Eastern Europe, but for most of my life, the rest of my family lived under communism. I hate all authoritarian communist dictators, and that's what Vladimir Putin is. So President Trump's treatment of him in public, look, the president would probably consider it an insult, like I would, to be called an intellectual. But that press conference was definitely idiotic. Here's what I said on Monday. The president totally wrong, not strongly condemn Russia attack. Just wish establishment types like Senator John McCain were as fired up over the regime that attacks us more than Russia, is more brutal authoritarian than Russia, is a much bigger threat than Russia, Xi Jinping's China. But, as happens so often these days, the hysterical, over-the-top reactions of the angry, hate-filled, conspiracy-mongering elite, or even worse, yes, the IYIs were out in force, led by the severely creepy John Brennan.
Well, good on Dan Coats to stand up for the women and men of the intelligence community. And those who are going to be silent in this administration are complicit. And so they need to be able to speak out very strongly. But what Mr. Trump did yesterday was to betray the women and men of the FBI, the CIA, NSA, and others, and to betray the American public. And that's why I use the term that this is nothing short of treasonous, because it is a betrayal of the nation. He is giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and it needs to stop.
Treason, idiot. And we saw escalating idiocy all week, with Democrats suggesting that President Trump is literally a Russian agent. Here's Senator Tammy Duckworth. Republicans in Congress cannot continue to turn a blind eye towards the very real possibility that Vladimir Putin has compromised our commander-in-chief and turned him, perhaps without his knowledge, into a Russian asset. And here today was the divisive 2020 presidential wannabe, Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton.
Do you think it's possible that the president is a Russian asset with or without his knowledge?
Well, I'm just saying that I don't know.
As usual, the extremism of the left pushes people not away from President Trump, but towards him. Look, after all the unhinged Russia talk this week, there are two important things to remember. First, that Putin is not the only, nor is he the most dangerous communist dictator threatening America. China's Xi Jinping is much more authoritarian, much more evil, and a much bigger threat. China's been meddling in our democracy for years, and you've barely heard peep out of the elites in Washington, mainly because they've been corrupted by Chinese cash, as we will show you in a can't-miss Swamp Watch next Sunday. The second important thing to remember is that we are the ones who've made our democratic process vulnerable to foreign attack by buying into the idea that technology improves it. Here's another IYI in action this week. Rod Rosenstein talking about how the Justice Department is planning to protect the 2018 midterm elections.
Public attribution of foreign influence campaigns can help to counter and mitigate the harm caused by foreign-sponsored misinformation. When people are aware of the true sponsor, they can make better informed decisions. We also help technology companies to counter covert foreign influence efforts. The FBI works with partners in the intelligence community to identify foreign agents as they establish their digital infrastructure and as they develop their online presence.
What an idiot. Dear Deputy Attorney General, the more we rely on big, centralized technology, the more fragile and vulnerable we are. If you want to make our election secure, go back to people marking their ballots with a pencil and paper, human beings counting them in school halls and phoning in the results on a landline. I'd like to see Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping try to hack millions of pencils across America. But no, our intellectual yet idiot ruling class has been bribed and mesmerized by big business and big tech. What a bunch of idiots. Tell me what you think at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. And make sure you pre-order my new book, Positive Populism. Here's the website. You can get it, positivepopulism.org. Right, here to discuss all of that, Fox News contributor and syndicated radio host Richard Fowler, and Fox News contributor and senior fellow at Independent Women's Voice, Lisa Booth. What a team. Here we go.
And congrats on the new book, Steve.
Thank you so much. You haven't read it yet.
No, but I'm still...
I've already pre-ordered.
It's still exciting. It's nonetheless. I'm sure it'll be great.
Give me the congrats after you've read it. Look, the president this week, you know, he took a lot of heat, including from many voices on this network, yours included.
Right.
I watched your reaction to what happened on Monday. But what's interesting to me is that, you know, you have Brian Kilmeade, Laura Ingraham and others. But what's interesting is that it seems to me the more over the top the critics go, the more it actually sways people in favor of President Trump, and his supporters just feel more in support of him.
Well, absolutely. And look, you wonder why President Trump, too, questioned the Intelligence Committee under President Obama, and then you hear John Brennan speaking like that. So, of course, President Trump had concerns about the intel community under President Obama. But you're right, Steve. A lot of us were, you know, concerned, didn't like the press conference. He even lost Newt Gingrich, has been, you know, probably one of the most reliable people in his corner. But here you go, and you've got all these people that grossly overreach. And you're right, it does bring people into his camp. Comparing it to Pearl Harbor, where we lost 2,400 Americans, you know, over 1,400 people injured, led to the Second World War.
Yeah.
We're talking about 60 million plus people died, 3% of the world's population. So to make a comparison like that is completely idiotic. And this is what people...
That's another one. They're not, was it the same person that compared it to Kristallnacht under the Nazis? Well, I mean, just unbelievable, this kind of talk.
Well, and people also continue to forget that President Trump, in terms of his policies, has been way tougher than President Obama was. And it was Robert Gates and Leon Panetta that said that Putin saw the opportunity to meddle in the election because of President Obama's weakness and his failure to match rhetoric with actions.
So, Richard, come on then. Do you think President Trump is a Russian agent?
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
That's what
right?
Seth Moulton said. Oh, come off it. You can't even.
But
and
here's
you
what,
can't think it's even.
But here's
no,
I think the reason
you have someone in Congress who's literally going to be one of the candidates for president.
I doubt that Moulton's going to run for Congress.
He's not dismissing this
completely
out of hand.
But herein lies the larger problem. The reason why we could even have this discussion is because President Trump opened the floodgates. The first thing the president does from a messaging perspective is he tries to, you know, conflate Russia meddling to Trump campaign collusion. There is a wide chasm between those two things. The Russia meddling in our election is a fact.
Yes,
period.
Absolutely.
The Trump campaign colluding is under investigation by the Mueller investigation, so we have to wait to see what happens with that. And I think when he keeps conflating the two, that is why he's in the situation that he's in today. And he's had one of the worst 2 weeks in foreign policy.
Yeah. But do you really think that it's been President Trump conflating those two issues?
Yes.
Democrats have been leading the charge in conflating the two issues to try to delegitimize this president. And Steve, one thing that never gets talked about, you had those on the left that were calling for faithless electors. So if we're worried about sowing chaos into the electoral process, nobody called that out. What does that do? What sort of message does that send voters that essentially your vote is irrelevant? And you had those on the left encouraging that.
So on the chaos point, I've heard this theory. I'd love to get your reaction to it, which is that let's just say that, I mean, there's a lot of talk that the Russians are absolutely doing it just as much as before for the midterms, right? So but there's speculation that actually if they really want to do the chaos, then what is chaotic is split government, divided government. You have Democrats controlling Congress, Republican in the White House. The Democrats might then impeach Trump. They want that chaos. In other words, that this time the Russian interference could be in favor of Democrats. If that turns out to be true, do you think the Democrats might actually have a different story on it?
Listen, there's no story on it. Our democracy is at stake when Russia or any foreign entity engage our election. And divided government, whether you like it or not, is actually the most effective government. Ask Newt Gingrich. He got more done as Speaker of the House working with Bill Clinton. Ask O'Neill. He got more done working with Ronald Reagan. Democrats and Republicans working together actually get more things accomplished.
That's a fair point.
History proves that.
Okay.
But the problem is that Democrats have been running this with this narrative of, basically leaving open the idea that Russia actually influenced the election.
But
the
they did.
Obama administration.
No, sorry,
but
just to be
the
clear,
Obama
they tried.
administration.
Everyone agrees that they tried to.
No,
there's absolutely no agreement that it affected the
We
result.
were told by Jay Johnson that one, the system is too decentralized to be for Russia to actually have an impact on the votes, being counted themselves. President Obama's come out and said that no votes were changed. You look at the amount of money spent. Look at places on social media. $2,000 in Wisconsin is a joke. Jeb Bush spent, I think, almost $3,000 per voter in the Republican primary in the state of Iowa. $2,000 is nothing. It's not changing
that the
votes or
Russians tried
opinions.
to hack into voter machines all across the country. They also
By the way, we could have easily been the Chinese and the Iranians and the Koreans as well. We were constantly going about Russia.
I hear all of that,
is a much worse threat.
But the
why
debate,
don't you hear it? Why don't you go on about it?
The debate right now is around Russia meddling in our election. And here's what we know here's what we know to be fact. They tried to hack into various voter machines, voter systems. We know they hacked the DNC. We know they hacked Podesta. That had a definite impact on the DNC operation, period. And if they had an effect on the DNC operation, which is a major political party in this country, they impacted the election. So this notion, this ideal that Russia never impacted the election is ridiculous.
But impacted is a very kind of vague term. Impacted is not the same as influenced and caused the election
So here's the question then. So the question, the real question on the table is the fact that all those DNC emails were out there. Do you think that had no impact on voters? You think one voter didn't change their mind because they read all those emails? If one voter changed their mind, then Russia had an impact on this election.
The idea that after this incredibly huge and surprising upset, beat this most unlikely candidate, beating 16 Republicans, then the most qualified la-di-da candidate ever. And the idea that incredible turnaround to what everyone expected happened because of the Russians, to me, seems
No, that's not. I think you're
ridiculous.
misconstruing what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if the email hack of Podesta's emails and the DNC emails slowed down one political party's ability to compete against another political party, then they had an influence on the election.
You made that point before, at least the last one.
Well, one, the WikiLeaks and the information released hardly got any coverage, especially not in comparison. I think the allegations against President Trump were covered 7 times as much as WikiLeaks in 1 week period. So it barely got covered in terms of some of these unsubstantiated allegations about President Trump.
Don't prepare your next thing. This has the last one.
I like this. Also, another point is the fact that President Trump has responded to this meddling as well in terms of sanctions, in terms of expelling Russian diplomats, and in terms of shuttering consulates and things like that. And also in response, sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. I mean, President Trump has responded by being very tough on Russia.
Okay, there we are. Good debate. I'm going to say it again. If you want an election that is not going to be hacked by anyone, pencil and paper. That's the way to go. All right, coming up, retail giant Toys R Us is out of business, and over 30,000 employees are fighting to get what they say they deserve. SWAT exposes the elite's disgraceful treatment of Toys R Us workers. And there used to be a time when Democrats were the party of working Americans, but some shocking news this week shows you that's no longer true. We'll tell you what it is after the break. Welcome back, everyone. In 2015, Bernie Sanders said, "Open borders, it would make everybody in America poorer. You're doing away with the concept of a nation state. Bring in all kinds of people, work for $2 or $3 an hour. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything we can to create millions of jobs." You know what youth unemployment is in the United States of America today? You think we should open the borders and bring in a lot of low-wage workers? Or do you think maybe we should try to get jobs for those kids? His political group, Our Revolution, has just fired our friend Tezlyn Figaro for saying basically the same thing. Tezlyn joins me now. Tezlyn, so great to see you. Thanks for being with us tonight. As I just said, good friend of the show. We don't always agree, but we always love the conversation. Just tell us what happened this week.
Well, you know, it's really unfortunate. Some comments that I had made prior to joining our revolution was dug up, was saying that, you know, me being a former staffer, working for the largest staffing firms in the world, first and third largest staffing firm, I've put over 300 people to work on my own payroll. So I was expressing a view on what people have experienced, particularly the African American community, on what they've experienced as far as not being have access to jobs, not going on what I heard, Steve, but going on what I know. So because I made that comment, there were a few people within the organization that did not agree and felt that it did not play into today's talking point, political talking point. And instead of talking about the issue at hand, which is the same thing that you are absolutely correct that Senator Sanders said, that we have to do something about immigration, not being against immigrants, certainly not being against people who are in this country now who are suffering with the separation of their children, but certainly also saying that it is important that we also talk about the people of this country, the people who are suffering now. You know, Congressman Barbara Jordan said the same thing, who's from Houston, Texas, where I'm at now. Even Senator Barack Obama said the same thing before he became president. So it seems that Democrats have lost their way with not being able to balance both conversations to talk about Americans, particularly the African American community, which is why Tom Perez is now apologizing to black women. So they're full of apologies, but yet have done nothing to actually work on the policies and the principles that matter to people like myself.
And Tezlyn, it's so interesting to me that the shift, you know, from, as we've just agreed, what the Bernie Sanders was saying in 2015, even during the course of the 2016 campaign, you could feel that he was pulling back from some of that argument as he realized that in the Democratic Party today, you can't get anywhere unless you really sign up to this open borders ideology, which is basically blesses any kind of immigration without limit. What do you think lies behind that shift in the party? You're inside of it, you're in these conversations. What's driving this?
Well, I mean, I would just say, just like hip-hop says, it's all about money, power, and respect, and the squeaky oil always gets the wheel. Unfortunately, even though African Americans certainly agree with what I said, the message hasn't been brought out to them because, to be quite honest with you, the left-wing media just doesn't want to cover it. You know, I'm criticized for coming on Fox News, even though I'm standing up for African Americans, called a racist, even though that's impossible to be a racist, to be black. But the reality is, it's all about who is going to scream the loudest. And African Americans have been screaming for a very long time. We've been screaming, we've been shouting, we've been marching. So the group has become disenfranchised and really just kind of over it. They don't no longer believe in politicians or politics. So that group of folks haven't got the same respect. And because we pride ourselves on voting over 90%, 95% Democrat Party, it is of less of value. That is why Tom Perez apologized to black women. But I'm here to tell black people, black women, to vote independent, be independent, make them actually come for our vote. The days are over for just being the mistress. And so until we demand that type of respect and say that I am okay with it, means if I lose a contract, I'm fine with that, because what I call this is the consequences of consciousness. And I've had elders who have gone before me who have endured much worse.
Tezlyn, thanks so much for that. Just stay with us. I'm just going to get Richard and Lisa, their reaction on this. This issue of the tension between uncontrolled immigration and its impact on workers, jobs, and incomes. It just seems like that argument has gone all one way in the Democratic Party today.
Well, I don't think you can characterize the Democratic Party as one thing or another, because I think Tezlyn makes a good point, right? That, you know, we need to be working on rebuilding communities like Baltimore, rebuilding communities like Detroit, rebuilding communities like Chicago. And what those communities need more than ever is they need investments and they need politicians and leaders that get it. But that all, with that being said, they can also benefit from not building a wall on our southern border, because that money can go to being invested in Chicago, right? And the one group that is the most that finds the wall to be the most heinous thing ever is African Americans. If you look at any poll, African Americans find the wall to be a waste of money, because that money can go to rebuilding Chicago, or rebuilding Detroit, or rebuilding Baltimore, or rebuilding Miami.
Yeah, okay, you got the money point, but which I think a lot of people would contest, but just on the issue of immigration and controlling immigration in the interest of protecting American workers, the kind of argument Bernie Sanders makes, Tezlyn makes, it's gone from the Democratic Party, isn't it?
Well, I would say, one, real quick, we've seen historic lows for African-American unemployment and Hispanic unemployment under this president. I would also say you can label the Democrat Party as one thing, and I would label them as intolerant, as evidenced by Tezlyn being fired because she had a differing point of view. Basically, the left operates in a mob mentality. If you don't share that belief, then they try to shut you down. They fire you. Case in point there. But back to your point regarding immigration, Democrats have done a complete 180 on this topic because, as Tezlyn pointed out, President Obama in his book Audacity of Hope essentially made that same argument that excessive influx of illegal immigration hurts low-skilled workers. President Obama literally wrote that, and it was back in the day, not even back to 2006, where Senator Dianne Feinstein was saying things like Democrats are solidly behind defending our borders and border security, and now it's the complete opposite.
And it's funny, I mean, that Obama point is so true. I've said that to Democrat friends of mine, and they said, oh, yeah, of course, Obama, he's a restrictionist. You know, so we've got no time. Just last word to Tezlyn. I'd just like to see if you've got any thoughts based on what Richard and Lisa have said, or just wrap it up for us, Tezlyn.
Well, you know, I agree with a lot what both the panelists said. I mean, when we talk about the financial point about, you know, it's not important to spend the money on building the wall, but also spending the African-American community. Before President Trump ever talked about building the wall, the money wasn't spent in the African-American community. We certainly know this, those of us who have been working on the left side. You know, I'm speaking again from being an employer myself, signing the front of the check, putting second chance citizens back to work. You know, I am really sick and tired of one thing, sweeping this constant hypocrisy under the rug. I'm not saying that Republicans get a pass because there's work to do there too, but it's the Democrat Party that comes around to the churches. It's the Democrat Party that asks for our votes. It's the Democrat Party that we've been loyal to. And so those are the ones that we have to hold accountable. And this has been way before Trump has gotten in office. And it's just time that we actually stand up and speak up for ourselves and demand that they have our vote. And I want to say one last thing. I have never been against anybody. I'm a veteran, a U.S. veteran of this country, and I'm offended when someone says I'm against anybody. I was willing to die for everybody. But I have a problem when we still have children who are sleeping on cement floors here in Houston, Texas for Hurricane Harvey, but yet we're also concerned about migrant children sleeping on cement floors too. So if we're concerned about children on cement floors, let's get them all off the floor, and let's start by building each other up, Americans as well as migrant communities.
Very powerful, Tezlyn. Really appreciate that, sincerely. And thank you for being with us, and all the best, and hope to see you back here in Los Angeles soon. Thanks a lot. Coming up, the unacceptable face of Silicon Valley. Can you guess whose it is? Find out after the break. But now, we'll be taping a special episode of The Next Revolution in New York on Wednesday, August the 1st, with world-renowned psychologist and author Jordan Peterson. We'd love to have you in the audience. For tickets, email us at hiltonaudience@foxnews.com. Welcome back, everyone. While the world cheered the heroic rescue of 12 Thai boys and their coach last week from a flooded cave, tech billionaire Elon Musk found himself getting into hot water. Here's what happened. And it's not exactly what's been reported elsewhere. After the cave crisis had been going on for over a week, someone asked Elon Musk on Twitter whether he or his engineers might be able to help. That led to a frenzied burst of work between the rescue team and Elon Musk's team, in which, to be fair, Musk behaved with complete professionalism and integrity. Later, a cave diver who was involved criticized Elon Musk, unfairly in my view, for trying to exploit the situation for PR benefit. In response, Musk did what any normal person would do. Used his massive Twitter platform to accuse him of being a pedophile, which, as far as I'm concerned, is literally the worst thing you can say about someone. Tweeting, "Sorry, pedo guy, you really did ask for it." Was this vile accusation just a rush of blood to the head? No. After the inevitable outrage, Musk didn't back down. He doubled down, again tweeting, "Bet you a signed dollar it's true." Eventually, after his own shareholders told him to, Musk issued a mealy-mouthed apology, which still included an attack on the man he'd so baselessly and viciously insulted, and his actions against Musk. Actions against you? What are you talking about? This is just a regular caving guy. You're a billionaire, one of the most famous people in the world, with a string of celebrity wives and girlfriends and 20 million Twitter followers. I hope lawmakers remember all this as they shower Elon Musk in taxpayer subsidies, reportedly nearly $5 billion worth. $5 billion. His Tesla cars come with a federal government subsidy of $7,500, topped up still further by taxpayers in certain states, including Arizona, Colorado, Louisiana, and of course, California. I hope you're happy that your tax dollars are at work to help some of the richest people in the country show off their environmental virtue, and to help one of the richest people in the world who has shown us what a sick bully he can be. I used to admire Elon Musk. I met him once around 6 years ago, and he showed me and a friend around his rocket factory right here in Los Angeles. I thought he was an inspiring entrepreneur. Now look what he's become. His descent into arrogance and bullying of the weak is a massive warning to the rest of Silicon Valley. Lisa, what do you make of this story?
Well, ironically, I think the biggest sin that Elon Musk did in terms of Silicon Valley is this report that he donated $40,000 to this Republican super PAC. I mean, in all honesty, I think that's going to really have the Silicon Valley people much angrier with him than this. But obviously, calling someone a pedophile is just a disgusting and slanderous thing to do. Obviously, this guy, the caver, is looking to potentially sue Elon Musk, so he's opening himself up from a legal standpoint to that challenge. And he's also got to be careful here because there's been numerous reports that his investors are really unhappy with him. Some of these Twitter antics they're upset with. Also, there's been reports of the new Model 3 car that cancellations are exceeding new orders. So they're upset about that as well. So, you know, he does need to be careful here. And as you pointed out, he apologized once his investors went to him and were like, you've got to fix this situation.
Yeah. So, Richard, I don't know, there's something about this sort of powerful person using their platform to bully someone I just found really offensive.
I agree there, and I think, though, I mean, let's first say that these cave divers were absolute heroes, and to do what they did and to save all that entire team and their coach was amazing. But beyond that, I think what Elon Musk is the poster child for is corporations gone bad. There was a time in this country where corporations actually had a vested interest in improving America. They invested in community. They believed in, you know, building community and building America and raising wages, and they believed that, you know, we got to stand by our workers. Now I think you see the opposite, and Elon Musk is the poster child for that. Now corporations are in this ridiculous race to the bottom where they continue to pile on more cash in the bank and their workers get hurt and they engage in these Twitter battles and get nowhere while the American people suffer. And he's just an example of where corporations in this country have gone to.
There you are. What a brilliant curtain raiser for Swamp Watch.
I think it was intentional.
Yeah, he's so good.
Richard was like, I'm going to tease him.
I know, he's really good. I don't have to bother. Anyway, as Richard was previewing, coming up, from bikes to trains to screwed over employees, a former Toys R Us worker is here for a special Swamp Watch you won't want to miss. And be sure to tune in at 10 p.m. Eastern here on the Fox News Channel for Life, Liberty and Levin. Here's Mark with a preview.
This week on Life, Liberty, and Levin, Mike Huckabee is my special guest, and he'll say things you've never heard him say before. We discuss faith, family, freedom, and the fundamentals of the Constitution. Don't miss it.
For decades, retail giant Toys R Us dominated the American toy sales market. But as of last month, Toys R Us is no more, with all 735 stores closed and 33,000 employees out of work. As sad as the situation is for all the fans of the store, the reality the employees face is even worse. The Toys R Us bankruptcy is this week's Swamp Watch. Because of the crippling debt that forced Toys R Us out of business, employees were given nothing but a thank you, not seeing a dime of the $75 million they say they're entitled to as severance pay. That's because current bankruptcy rules define employee severance payments as unsecured debt, only paid after secured debts, like the bank loans that pay for lawyers and financial advisors. By the time the fat cats are paid for, there's nothing left for the employees. Those rules go back 40 years to the 1978 Bankruptcy Reform Act. Congress could change them if they wanted to. But of course they don't, because as Swamp Watch has shown time and again, Congress has a long track record of siding with big business against the American worker. To throw salt in the wound of this Toys R Us case, 17 of their executives, including CEO David Brandon, were handed out between $16 and $32 million in bonuses last year. Yes, bonuses. The executives justified this by saying the bonuses were necessary to make sure they performed at a high level during the bankruptcy. Absolutely sickening. And that's not all. Toys R Us attorneys and advisors are expected to be paid almost $350 million in fees. For example, bankruptcy lawyers Kirkland and Ellis admitted in court filings they were charging as much as $1,745 an hour. That's 25% more than the average highest rate in 10 of the largest bankruptcies in 2017. Not to mention bankruptcy consultants Hilco Global and Tiger Capital Group, who actually got bonuses for closing stores quickly. And you can be sure New York-based Malfitano Partners, hired for help in soliciting and evaluating proposals to liquidate inventory, will be cashing their paychecks as well. But store employees? They're left looking for new retail jobs with no severance pay as a cushion. hoping their next company won't also go bankrupt and screw them all over again. To all the elitists out there, this is why we have the populist revolution. This is why Donald Trump was elected. This is why, when Bernie Sanders talks about a rigged economy, he's right. People across the country, including DC lawmakers, are taking aim at private equity firms, Bain Capital, started by Mitt Romney, KKR and Vornado Realty Trust, for their role in Toys R Us's downfall. And many are saying the Wall Street billionaires who killed the company with crippling debt are now laughing their way to the bank, sucking out $470 million in management and interest fees. Well, former Toys R Us workers are fighting back, and former store manager Madeline Garcia joins me now. Madeline, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. Just tell us about your experience.
Thank you, Steve, for having me. I've worked for Toys R Us for 30 years. I started as a cashier and worked all the way up to store manager in the Boynton Beach, Florida store. And to find out that Toys R Us was going out of business, closing, was devastating for all of us. It's something that we did not expect. When they announced that they were going to close the stores at the beginning of the year, there was a communication that went out that said they're going to close the first 182 stores, and team members will be placed either at another nearby store or they will be given a severance package to help them through the transition. A month later, they came back and said there is no severance paid for no team members because of the bankruptcy filing.
So it's actually worse than what I just laid out, because it's not just that they left you with nothing. They actually broke a promise that would protect you through this tough time.
Correct. Toys R Us have always, for 70 years, paid out severance pay when it closed down a store or they had eliminated a position. This time they came back and just said no because of the bankruptcy laws. However, the executive bonus says. However, all the top executives received. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, look, I can imagine how you feel. I don't want to, make the pain worse for you, actually. I just want to ask you, hopefully in a more positive and optimistic way, what can we do about it? What are you trying to achieve? What can we help with to try and do something about this?
We want to see the changes made in the bankruptcy laws so that it doesn't happen again in future for retail workers. We also want Bain Capital, KKR, and Vornado Realty Trust to come to the table and pay Toys R Us workers what we deserve. We worked hard for it. We built the company. They didn't do it. We did. So we deserve to get severance. It's the only fair and right thing to do.
And just a final question, is this an organized effort? Are you part of a group pushing for this?
Yes. We're part of Rise Up Retail, which is a movement of workers fighting for voice and respect in the retail industry.
Great. Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming and sharing your experience. Really, really appreciate it, and all the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
So, I mean, I don't know, that what we just learned there, that it's not only they didn't pay up, they promised they would, and then they didn't. I mean, this is, like you were saying, this is
not, sadly, Steve, we've seen this movie play out before. Right. Over and over again, we've seen corporations and a Congress that is backed by corporations because their lobbyists run through Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, and they do what they want. And let's talk about the Trump tax cut, for example. Many of these companies benefit from this tax cut. Kimberly-Clark is another one of these bad corporations. And after getting money from the tax cut, getting money from American taxpayers, they let off 5,000 people, right? And when you talk about the bankruptcy reform, which was renewed in 2005, every time they open up the bankruptcy reform, every time they open up bankruptcy laws, it always benefits bank regulators, and it never benefits the American people. So we've got to be mindful about what's happening in this country, and I think it's very important for everybody watching tonight to make sure they're calling the member of Congress and being very mindful of the bills that's passed and who is behind them and what is being done and who's it for and who's it against. Usually, it's against working families.
Right. So look, the interesting thing politically, Lisa, I think, is that President Trump, unusually for a Republican, he talked all the time about being the party of the American worker, still does. That means getting involved on the workers' side on issues like this, no?
Well, you've also seen under President Trump hundreds of businesses passing savings from the tax reform law down to employees, and President Trump has highlighted those sorry events across the country. So you've also seen that. I actually think her biggest gripe and grievance should be against Toys R Us and their failure to their failure to look at basically the changes in, with internet retailers like Amazon and Walmart, and their failure to change their business model to keep up, because it's basically Amazon and Walmart's ability to bring toys at a much cheaper cost that has helped driven Toys R Us out of business. So their antiquated business model wasn't able to keep up in the changing economy. So honestly, I think the biggest grievance is with mismanagement on the business side of things.
But if you promise your workers a severance package, and you've given severances in the past, you're like, oh, we have a little loophole, so we're going to get out of it.
They're paying
I just want to say that we don't have
but they're paying off their shareholders.
I want to say something.
They're paying
it's
off
my
their
show.
shareholders.
I want to say something, which is that point that Lisa made about the transition to a new economy is so important, and that's why I couldn't believe the fact that we actually had a really important announcement on that this week from the Trump administration, led by Ivanka Trump, a new initiative to train workers for the jobs of the future. Do you know how much coverage that got? We did an analysis. ABC News, 0. NBC News, 0. CBS News, 0. They're not interested, and yet that's the kind of thing that actually could help with a very good point you made about this big economic transition. I've gone on too long. Sorry about that. Coming up, is there a positive alternative to our economic relationship with China? There is actually, and after the break, we'll meet the author of a new book who knows all about it. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. If you've watched this show before, and if not, why haven't you? You've probably heard all about why I think China is the real enemy America needs to be wary of, not Russia. But is there an alternative to economic dependence on China? What about India? Joining me now from Singapore, the author of The Billionaire Raj, a journey through India's new Gilded Age, James Crabtree. I think we're going to say good morning to you, James. It's morning there, isn't it?
Good morning, Steve. It's about 9:40 in the morning here in Singapore.
Very good. So listen, you've written all about India and how that country's changed so remarkably in recent years. I think that this argument about China often goes one way. It says, yeah, we'd like to kind of disentangle ourselves from China. It's not a great regime, etc., etc. But you're stuck because who else are you going to trade with? Who else are you going to invest with, etc.? But India's a massive economic opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, India is a huge and growing economy. It's the fastest growing economy in the world. You were just talking about Amazon and Walmart in your last segment. So Walmart just invested $16 billion to buy an Indian tech company. Amazon's investing $5 billion to try and become the largest e-commerce player in India. Uber as well is trying to win there. So you have a lot of American businesses looking to India as it starts to grow in the way that China used to. But it's a much bigger issue. China, as you have said on your show, is slipping backwards into a form of neo-Leninist autocracy. India is the world's largest democracy. It's a broadly speaking market economy. It could be a great friend to America if America plays its cards right.
So what do you describe in your book in terms of what's happening with India's economic and development and in other ways?
Well, so India is growing very quickly. As I said, it's the world's fastest growing economy. India, although it actually has some of the same problems that you face in the United States. So it has a deep and vibrant tech sector. It has a lot of big companies, but it also has a growing problem with inequality. There were only 2 billionaires in India in the mid-1990s. There's now something like 120. That's more than any country apart from China and America. So while India is growing and becoming more economically important and attracting more investment, it's also struggling with some of the same problems of inequality that you have in the United States.
And do you think that what's the attitude of India to investment and economic partnership? Would they welcome it with open arms, or are they more kind of wary of, for example, the US getting involved with them economically?
Well, I think this is the big opportunity. That if you look at it, particularly from Silicon Valley, where you live, and with some of what you've been talking about, China has a completely closed ecosystem for foreign investment. So if you look at the American tech giants, they're not even allowed to open there. India is Facebook's largest market by users, Google, Twitter. They don't make a lot of money there because the country is quite small, but in terms of the number of people they have using their platforms, it's big. And so while China has a big head start, both in terms of the size of its economy and the vibrancy of its tech sector, India has a much more open system and one that's much more willing to engage with outsiders, particularly from the United States. And so in the medium term, that should give India an advantage.
James, brilliant. I have to leave it there for now, but I really want to talk about this a lot more. I think it's crucial in terms of the sort of geopolitics in the rest of this century, frankly. Your book is fascinating. Congrats on that. Hope everyone goes and buys it. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Steve.
Coming up, Lisa and Richard are back with final thoughts. Don't go away. So, time for some wise words from our fantastic team here. Richard, over to you.
Well, I actually think this India segment was interesting because I think if...
Unlike the rest of the show.
No, the whole show was interesting, but the India segment was interesting, particularly because
yeah, I got it.
Instead of, I think, a senseless trade war against China, I think we're better off using our money investing in India as a way to counterbalance China because of the amount of foreign direct investment they have in emerging markets all across the world.
That's a great point. They're huge on that.
I thought the immigration segment was very interesting among the other ones as well. So, just looking at the 180 that Democrats have done on the issue, and also one thing that never gets talked about is if you actually look at polling, the majority of Americans side with President Trump on a lot of these issues, whether it's sanctuary cities, whether it's border security, and even on the wall. So something that doesn't get talked about. It's true. I'll show you the polling, Richard. We can talk about it.
Well, we're going to keep talking about it. That is all we have time for tonight. You can learn more about the Next Revolution by following us at NextRevFNC. Mark Levin is up next. I'm Steve Hilton. See you next Sunday when the Next Revolution will be televised.